right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our 8th annual Latino Book Festival. We're here at the Lucero Library in Pueblo, Colorado with Emilly Prado. Emilly is our author today. She wrote the book Funeral for Flaca. And Emilly is a writer, community organizer, the director of youth programs at Literacy Arts in Portland, Oregon programs, and when not writing or teaching, Emilly moonlights as a DJ, Mommy Miami, and Noche Libre, the Latinx DJ collective she co-founded in 2017. So give me a round of applause and welcome.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for being here. Just so you know, I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to try to project my voice, but there's also a few more seats closer if you're having a hard time hearing me, and I will try to speak up also. But thank you all so much for being here today. This is my first time in Colorado, actually, and I have been on a Western United States book tour promoting my book, Funeral for Flakka. This book tour is a community-funded effort, so people in Portland and other readers who have found my work as a journalist originally and as a DJ have supported my tour so that I could go from Oregon all the way through California, Arizona, New Mexico, El Paso, Texas, and then heading up here through Colorado. So I'm very happy to be here today and to share a little bit more about my work. Welcome. So for those of you who don't know, Funeral for Flakka is a collection of essays that details my experience coming of age in the San Francisco Bay Area. First, it explores my childhood and is told from the perspective of that voice primarily. So if you start reading the collection, you'll notice that the voice is that of a younger, about 5-year-old character, which is myself, and then progresses all the way through the time I'm 29 years old. This collection explores themes of family, grief, loss, the experience of mental health, and assault. And ultimately, through these varied experiences, I am trying to find, through this sort of loop of re-traumatizing myself, a semblance of healing. And so the collection ends with a note of still discovering and figuring out what it means to be healing. But I consider this book very much a part of that process and a part of what has brought me to being able to close the chapter on some of those moments in my life so that I can make space for what's next. There will be a time for you all to ask questions. So while you're listening to me read, please, do come up with some questions you have for me, whether it's about the writing process or about, my experience as a writer. Anything that you are interested in learning, I'm happy to answer or attempt to answer here today. And then before I begin, I do just like to acknowledge that I am the daughter of a Mexican immigrant from Michoacán, Mexico, and a Mexican American who was born in California. My parents met when they were in high school, and I like to acknowledge just my parents as part of my journey in being able to become a writer. It was instrumental to have parents who sacrificed a lot in order to provide for us, and without their work and my ancestors and my grandparents' work, I couldn't be here writing and talking about my book today. So first, I just like to acknowledge my own lineage and ancestors. And again, just grateful to each of you for taking time out of your day and your lives to be here. I know we're all busy folks. So thank you for being here today. So although the collection progresses chronologically, I'm going to start really towards reading some of the latter half of this essay collection. Each of the essays is also the title of a song. As Maria mentioned, I am a DJ, and I attribute a lot of my very musical interest to my mother showing me different music that she was interested in. And so this essay is called ¿Por qué me haces llorar?, which means, why do you make me cry? It's a really beautiful song. So if you have a book, if you'd like to read along while I read out loud, It is on page 93. My papi's family is old school. The adults stand in clusters at parties, and when we younger familia arrive, we must walk from huddled group to group and interrupt them with greetings. The señoras get a small handshake or hug and a fake kiss. Our cheeks touch, turned, and we pucker at the air in unison. The señores get a handshake and sometimes a fake kiss too, if you know how they're related to you. Parties happen several times a year: Easter, bautizos, first communions, birthdays, deaths. The parties are big, no fewer than 50 guests in attendance, with linen-covered table rentals, buffet or taquero, mariachi, and or a DJ, and plenty of tequila, vino, y cerveza. How many people successfully pull off the payaso de rodeo line dance determines exactly how cool a party is. If it takes us 22 minutes to enter a party, it takes at least 2 times longer to leave when we make the rounds again because more adults have inevitably arrived. And the alcohol makes way for truer, blunter, lengthier things they want to get off their minds, like why we don't come around more often, or if we know our papi loves us. My sister and I have learned that if we don't follow the rules, somebody will tell somebody, and then somebody else will tell our dad, even if he isn't there, and everyone will know we are disrespectful. Growing up, I often felt that our mere presence as bastard children, as the first family, was a disrespect, or at least another reason to be more scrutinized. It was like we were seen as washed-up child stars doomed for misery, and worse, poverty. My papi believes elders deserve our undying respect. He believes there are rules for how we must behave, and I have been taught to follow these. No andas con esas caras, he'd say to me when so often my face would betray my attempts at obedience. Quote, your face is going to get stuck like that, my mom would sometimes chime in. Even though my papi is the one who was born in Redwood City, and my mommy was born in Apatzingan, he is the more Mexican one, having been raised there. My mommy would agree. Other rules I have learned. Don't talk back. Asking questions is talking back. Don't cry, that's talking back. Say please and thank you. Repeat these with a smile if somebody else decides you sound insincere. Dress for parties with a full body commitment. You will be judged by the smoothness of your hair, to the colored polish of your toenails, to the slimness of your waistline, and everything in between. Men are the heads of households and can do as they please. Our women aren't afraid to physically fight even at family parties. And only cry when you can blame the tequila or corridos. There is a years-long stretch of time when my mother and father speak every week. My mommy, mid-dishwashing, would rinse herself of suds, turn off the kitchen sink, then wipe her hands with a towel as quickly as she could to make sure she'd pick up our home phone by the second or third ring. Neck cranked to one side, cradling the receiver, she'd finish drying her hands with her jeans and would make the short walk down the hall to the bedroom they once shared. She'd lay on her back over the made bed, pick up the beige ringlet corded phone from the nightstand, and hang up the wireless one. Then they'd talk. Sometimes she'd twirl her soft hair or the curled cord or pick out lint from her belly button. They'd do this for a long time. She says they'd talk about us, her kids. She'd tell him about what we were up to, what we needed, and probably how much money he should send. I can't imagine there'd been hours of conversation to be had about their 3 babies, but somehow there was. I don't remember if they'd say they loved each other at the end or silently in their heads, but I think this could be a possibility. I wonder if my mommy was like a therapist, taking in all the ways he was trying to work through his being fucked up, or perhaps helping him see the ways he still was, or the ways he'd grown, or if this was just another space for my mommy to keep up the hope that he could be changed, or really want change. My mommy believes people can change. My mommy believes and feels it in her own bones how life is not just, how good people can get hurt just as easily as the bads, how the ones who puff up their chests to pretend they are all edges are usually the most sad and soft. No one is innocent in her eyes, and everyone hurts and has been hurt in their own ways. She holds so much love for others, but not very often for herself in the same way. I think I have learned these same lessons from her. My parents actually have a great relationship, I'd tell the nosy parents of friends or teammates who'd inquire about the structure of my fragmented family. Wow, you're lucky, they'd all say. And then, my parents have a great relationship was only true for half a decade. As the sad-ass saying goes, I suppose all good things must come to an end. My sister's riff with our stepmother when Erica was 17 or 18 was the tidal wave that damaged everything around it. My mommy and papi's cordial relationship was swallowed, and my 10-year-old Emily's song lyric comparisons were respawned. I still don't know the details of their riff in full, but I know I'm afraid of picking at scabs. I think all parties involved would tell a different side of their story. I think all versions could be summarized with broken trust and stupidity and a silver ring maybe stolen by my sister and our cousin from Cammie, my stepmom, and a maybe joke gone wrong, and most of all, nobody on any side wanting to back down. I still think about sides now, how we have each other's back until we don't, and how blood always comes first, but how sometimes there are exceptions when your blood flows through so many veins. I think everyone is guilty. I think we all need therapy. I know I am tired of asking what went wrong. Mommy and Papi go most of 4 years without talking. Child support requests are delivered via text or voicemail. I'm 17, having made it through high school. I even graduate from the alternative program I enrolled in early. My sister goes on to community college and then moves to San Francisco with her boyfriend. She is punished by having tuition support from my dad withheld from moving in with her boyfriend, now husband, before marriage, and winds up with a mountain of student debt. Hector does middle school. We've been raising a puppy named GT, a tribute to my sister's Sapphire Mustang Gran Turismo. My papi and mommy only see each other at our graduations. Our fragments have started to form islands. My mother's belly is round again for the 4th time. It is 2008. She is 40 years old. It has been 13 years since the last time. She tells people this baby is a miracle. My mommy has finally found lasting love in a dog park by her house. She says she's learned to get over her new love's thick Peruvian accent. I think his telenovela looks help. Slick back hair, sharp jaw, stick-straight posture, and chiseled arms. She asks the doctors to untie her tube so she can gift her childless partner one of his own. People, including her children for many years to come, don't need to know this baby was created with the miracle of science, an expensive and oh-so-worthy petri dish. I think the procedure she'd get maybe lined up with the time she said she was going in for gallbladder surgery. I tell this lie to a doctor who asks about my family's medical history. Later, when I learn the truth of her IVF, I am offended by her withholding. I don't understand her reasons, or most reasons for lying. I wouldn't judge her choices, but I have been lying by proxy. But these secrets are my mommy's own. Secrets are her protection. And I'm going to stop there. So as you can see, part of what the story explores is how I can write a memoir and revisit memories of my family and how difficult that can be, especially when these foundational truths, I say, are cracking, where a lot of the things that I thought were happening were growing up maybe weren't happening in the exact way. Of course, there's a layer of protection that we offer children by not telling the full truth. But the lines, I think, of when is too far or too much get blurry, especially as a person having experienced it and lived through it. And so I have 2 more pieces I'm going to read here today. And I'm going to actually skip forward, and then we'll skip back a little bit. And I'm going to read this on page 173. It's called Mad. And I'm going to take a sip of my tea real quick to help my throat. So I'll let you catch up to the page if you're reading. This essay is the title, Mad, of a song by an artist named Solange. Really beautiful song that I recommend you check out if you haven't yet. And it explores, sorry, my mask is, there we go. It explores my relationship with what this idea of transformative justice might look like as the survivor of sexual assault. And so transformative justice is a step beyond, if you've ever heard of the term restorative justice, but essentially where you're bringing all parties involved in whatever harm was caused. And there is typically a centering of the person who has, the victim or the person who has had the harm caused to them. It's a progressive idea often used like in school settings where, if two classmates are playing with each other and one upsets the other, the idea is to restore the relationship back to before the hurt. And with the idea of transformative justice, it takes us a step further where instead of bringing it back to the point of before the harm was caused, it looks at the structure. Well, what caused the harm in the first place? What are the systems in place that might have supported the harm? So if it's in the case of a student at school, we might look at, well, is there something in the routine of the schedule that doesn't allow for the student to get their energy out at different times of the day? Or are they not able to be heard because of the institution itself? So it zooms out a little bit further. But this just kind of touches the surface of that. It delves further into that idea into the essay deeper. But in the beginning here, I'm just sort of coming to terms with, well, what would it look like to be healed from this experience? My therapist asked me how I feel about healing. I pause for too long. I stretch a well, as my mind teeters between calculations, turning over answers so quickly they melt into each other and become putty. I string together something about defeat, that it feels like it's out of reach, and that I reject the idea that states of being or harm can be fixed. I think healing sounds nice, but it sounds aspirational. I'm not sure what healed looks like. I forget to mention my answer changes depending on the day. She asks if I feel angry. I say I do. To have healing means to have been harmed. Healing invokes hurt. I am mad. I'd have preferred to have been preserved whole. I don't name the people or the systems aloud, but they flood me at once. When I was 5, when I was 6, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 16, when I was born, today, tomorrow. I listened to a podcast about forgiveness. I think this might be a step towards healing, but there might be nothing I hate more than to be asked for forgiveness. The audacity of a request to be absolved. I am no priest. I will not prescribe a few rote Hail Marys and eternal repentance. Forgiveness is mine and mine only. It will not be granted. It will not be doled. It will not be summoned by anyone other than myself. Quote, forgiveness is for white people. I conjure crisp essay theses, sentences, and titles. Quote, in defense of the schoolyard bully. I log them as fragments in my notes app. Quote, when your heroes harm. I think these titles are profound, but when I get around to trying to write them more fully, they often feel empty and small. I can't recall the part of my brain that was so sure of a sentence, the part that was sure I would and could return to flesh out the thought. It's not that I no longer believe forgiveness is for white people. It's that I don't know if I know what forgiveness is. I know what it is not, an apology or accountability. Quote, The journey to release all grudges, to relinquish the quest for revenge, and to let go of the fantasy of what might have been is one of the most difficult spiritual challenges we will ever face, Oprah Winfrey says of forgiveness on her podcast, Super Soul Conversations. The other side of forgiveness is freedom. I think this sounds nice. When I was in 5th grade, Miss Rook assigned a state research project to our class. We could pick any state except California. The coolest ones were claimed first. Hawaii, New York, Texas, Alaska. I kept my noodly fingers crossed and got my pick. Illinois, the state my papi lived in. My mommy took me to Walgreens and let me get the thick, fancy black foam board and sheets of thin red, white, and blue. I made the poster post 9/11 patriotic. I cut out squares and stars and used our printer instead of my messy handwriting to make sure my message was clear. I used AOL and checked out nonfiction books from our school library. I covered my ground. State flower, motto, flag, nickname, governor. I picked out Oprah Winfrey for famous person. I wrote that Oprah grew up in poverty and was raised by a single mom. She was raped as a child, and she became one of the richest celebrities through her own hard work, her own version of an American dream. I wrote that me and my single mommy watched the Oprah Winfrey Show together, which in 2001 had been on television more than 1.5 times as long as I'd been alive. Oprah helped people with her show. At that time, she had lived in Chicago for 17 years and will live there for another decade. I get a B on my project because Oprah was not born in Illinois. I still haven't forgiven Miss Rook. Sorry, y'all, my throat is just, it's the second event today, and I'm trying here. Yeah, scratchy throat. Okay. Thank you all for bearing with me. I might have to take another break at a moment to get another sip of tea. Earlier today, I was at CSU-Pueblo. It was an amazing event, and there was a lot of space in this big library, and the microphone went out. And we were noticing that the sound doesn't carry at all either. Because it's a library, so the sound is meant to be contained, and so I was really exerting myself. So I'm sorry, but yeah, it's hard. Okay, so the final essay I'm going to read today, and then I'll turn the floor to you all to ask any questions you have, is really about the title, Funeral for Flakka. I heard you comment that your mom said you were too flaquita. Do you want to share what Flakka means? Skinny. Mm-hmm.
She was sure that I was going to get cute because I was Flaca.
Yes. So sometimes being too skinny is viewed as a negative, and sometimes it's viewed as kind of just a statement, as you're a skinny girl. In the feminine here, Flakka. If you're flaco, it's skinny boy. And this was a nickname that I was given by my dad, and a nickname that I was called most of my life until I noticed that they weren't calling me it anymore. And so when I was writing this book, I didn't know I was writing a book, but essentially my process was going through different memories that I had and just trying to write them out and see how I felt about the memories. I didn't really know where the memories would take me or how they would take shape in an essay, but I knew I wanted to explore what it was like to have a nickname that then no longer was my nickname, and especially one that was tied to physical appearance. Another essay does explore more specifically an eating disorder that I had when I was in high school. And I didn't write that until much later, but first came this essay. It was one of the earlier essays. And so this title of Funeral for Flakka is a way that I am sort of looking at putting to rest this nickname and thinking of the funeral in Mexican tradition, which I didn't come to until actually adulthood because we didn't celebrate Dia de los Muertos. but thinking about when we, say goodbye to people, our relationship to them doesn't have to end. Often our relationships can change. And so in some ways, I'm making space for putting that name to rest and seeing what can bloom in its space instead. So I think of Flaca as a shedding of my previous self and making peace with that, as opposed to holding on to this thing that I will likely no longer, come back to. So this one is on page 161. And it's called La Llorona. In the middle of Mama Coyo's house, in Aguililla, Michoacán, there is a tree with thick beige roots buried deep into the ground. Papa Nano lives there too, but I have become accustomed to referring to it as her house on account of my own single mother, the single mother of all my friends. It grew right before our eyes, even though no one noticed. If you're not careful and walk too heavy, you can kick a square tile loose. As kids, we'd climb up the arms of the tree. We'd run to the tree for safety, for protection from Mama Coyo's viciously nippy macaw. One time, my sister Daniela wasn't careful enough and tumbled down so many feet onto her back. She cried, but she did not die. Growing up, I was sure it was because God had been watching. The hole in the roof of Mama Coyo's house is not an accident. It's more like a broad sunroof made without glass. If I chopped down the tree at the heart of this house, I could count the rings to tell you how old it is, but I can tell you instead that it was more than 2 embraces wide when I was 7 years old. It took almost 20 years before I saw anything else like it, another tree smack in the middle of a house. In the daytime, el sol beams down, and Papa Nano lays across the plastic weave folding chair in the salon, warmed and swatting flies in his sleep. I've never seen Papa Nano's eyes because he hides them behind thick black sunglasses, having lost one to a dart or maybe a stick as a kid, but I'm sure he is asleep when I see him lying there, at least some of the time. At night, the stars glimmer and the black shadows of fleeting birds and bats dash overhead. The tree at the heart of the house continues to grow and happily laps up the rainwater when it pours. Unlike me, the tree is not afraid, not of the water or the lightning or the thunder that shuts off our electricity and shakes the other two-toned houses around. When I was still little in every way, my tiny body would shake as I cried and covered my ears, holding my breath when the flashes brought light and the dread of a mounting roar. I was taught to be less scared because Mama Coyo told me in Spanish that God built an invisible barrier around this pueblo to protect it from being burned by lightning strikes. She'd tell me how this pueblo had existed for thousands of years and not once did it get burned to a crisp or crack under a bolt of ice-white relámpago. This house is where my papi grew up when he was blonde and blue-eyed for the first 2 years of his life. This is where my papi continued to grow when his hair turned black and his skin turned brown, and he lost 2 of his 9 siblings, one from a gunshot and another from a scorpion sting inside her baby cuna. This is the house I spent my summers in, growing up and into my morena skin and learning the feeling of what it's like to blend in for the first time. In Mexico, I learned the nicknames of every kid on the block and wore my own name proudly. My papi must have called me his Flaca the first time he laid his eyes on me. A slippery and noodly 22 inches long, 6 pounds light. Skinny girl doesn't have the same ring to it like so many other words that lose their poesy by way of translation, but his skinny girl I was. In Aguililla, I was also Flaca, and there was the loud and wildly goofy Chucho, The rude-ass, gold chain-wearing bully was called Carlingas. Across the way were Ticho y Toco, the older neighborhood sisters turned lifetime family friends, one of which I witnessed pretending to be my aunt when my family helped her cross the border as I sat in the back row of our Suburban. And a few blocks further out lived Canelo, the cinnamon-haired, amply freckled Moreno. Plus, my little brothers Flaco, Hector, and Gordo, Hector, were also nicknamed on account of their weight. My papi was given the nickname of Chayote when he emerged from the womb with hair eternally reaching high up into the sky. His strands, the prickly spikes of the chayote vegetable, known in English less beautifully as the Merleton squash. My mom's nickname is Chatia, a nickname passed down from her own mother's nickname of Chata, and one given to people blessed with allegedly funny noses. My tia Delfina was always known as Concha, and when she died, my family wrote it on her funeral invitation with pride. Having witnessed nicknames lasting lifetimes and up to and beyond the grave, I did not know names could have an expiration date until my own had come and gone. I do not know when my own Flakka was annulled, but maybe it was right after my 21st birthday. There was no coroner or grim reaper who appeared after the scale passed a certain number, nor a memo sent from my father alerting me my nickname was dead. What is the name for a grief that creeps in after losing something, mixed with the backdated guilt and shame of not really noticing? What is the nickname for a person who no longer embodies their name? What happens to a person who has become unrecognizable to some? What do we call a tree that's been severed from its roots? A person who has been robbed of their identity? Men in my family have come up to tell me I'm no longer Flakka. Women in my family have told me this too. When I told my mom a mustache man, some distant relative, approached me at my Papa Nano's birthday party and said he remembered when I used to be spaghetti, my mommy laughed. Spaghetti, she cackled. Spaghetti! She repeated the punchline back several times. But when my mom stops laughing, she tells anyone who will listen that she used to be spaghetti too. I am mad at the mustache man, but I'm even more mad at the mustache man for the sake of my mommy. Maybe I should have realized my provisional nickname was a challenge, the 2 syllables, a double-edged sword, yielding adoration and taunting, daring me to live up to my name, to govern the food that touches my lips when I can no longer eat, quote, without consequence. Flakka, a hissing reminder that I should hunch to make myself seem smaller, and that giving up on counting calories meant giving up on who I was born to be. Flakka is a name to be earned and not a name for the weak. Flakka is not even given to girls or women who are average or who teeter to the other side of BMI. Flakka is not to be given to girls who look like me. Sometimes I wonder what being seen as skinny again would give me. What I'd get in return if only I was thinner, if only my kind of overweight didn't result in a belly as rolly, if only my hips didn't jut out, disrupting that Kim K hourglass illusion, the only figure thicker girls are supposed to have. Sometimes I wonder what ribbons I'd win, what clothes Cosmo magazine would finally tell me I could wear, what it would take for Papi to rechristen me as Flakka again. And then I remember there has never been a time I believed I lived up to my nickname of Flakka. There was never a time I looked down at myself and thought, this body is so beautiful, I am such a skinny girl. There was never a time I was at peace with my body when I was convinced all I needed was at war. There was only the time when accidentally starving myself became purposely starving myself. The years when my mommy called me an anorexic without knowing how to take it more seriously or help. The sophomore year of high school dotted by walking pneumonia, a sinus infection, and half a dozen colds in the span of 6 months. The many seasons of feeling perpetually cold. The day nearing high school graduation when I looked up the signs of suffering from an eating disorder and checked off my matching symptoms. Thinning hair, brittle nails, easily bruised, low immune system, low self-esteem. The same day as my matching symptoms when I told myself going through formal treatment wasn't an option because of the cost and sure to mortify family chisme. There was also the near decade of falsely thinking all recovery meant was forcing food into my body. In the years since, when grocery shopping still felt like an impossible math equation, every bagged item another calculation, and even now when I feel like I'm constantly scanning my thoughts for corruption, filter what media and celebrity accounts I consume, and even though my fear of relapse still follows, I still continue to search for my own version of healing. This house in Aguililla has witnessed and cycled right alongside my own family's births, growth, and deaths. I have not been back to this house in at least 12 years, but I have heard it, like me, looks different. My cousin tells me Mama Coyo has a new macaw, still as vicious as the last. Mama Coyo has retired from making cheese. The cows Papa Nano once herded back into the small rancho next to the house have been replaced by parked cars. And they've maybe closed up the opening in the roof, chopping down the once spawning tree. I think this is what change looks like. All I can think of is what's gone. This house is a casket where I will lay Flaca and las vacas and Mama Coyo's first macaw to rest. At the funeral, I will dig a hole into the foundation and drop each letter of my old name one by one. I will stir the dirt with the remains of tree roots and say a prayer for us all for old time's sake. At the funeral, there will be no procession or eulogy, no explanations necessary, and for once I won't be wearing all black. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I know that the library has made copies available for free, which is very generous. And does anyone have any questions about the book or anything you heard today?
I walked in late.
Yes.
Where did you grow up? Califas?
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my parents are from Michoacán, Mexico. Mm-hmm.
How long did you stay in your grandmother's house in Mexico? Or did you just come and go in the summers?
I would come and go in the summers. The longest summer I spent there was a month when I was 10. And I mean, there's some of my favorite memories. It was really interesting to be immersed in a place that was so different from where I'd grown up. And as a kid, it was really liberating to be in this area of Mexico. It's a small town, and it's a town where everyone kind of knows each other. I'd go with my cousins and we'd spend the whole day just out exploring the streets and going into the river. And they had an ATV, a four-wheeler, and we'd just take it around town and, get into trouble. But there was so much freedom, not only, like I said, in kind of blending in and not immediately sticking out in the way that I felt. I grew up in a very white suburb, and I was one of a few kids who were not white. And it was a very stark contrast to, not immediately stand out. And I felt really comfortable. So I loved going there. And unfortunately, the area that my family's from is actually undergoing a lot of violence right now. So it's hard to visit because a lot of the cartel and stuff in that area are blocking off roads. And it's hard. We haven't been there in a long time. They come to the U.S. more often, and it's easier for them actually to come than for us to go there because the town is so small. You fly into the biggest, capital, but then you have to drive 7 hours. There's no clearer route than that.
So did you speak Spanish in California?
Yeah,
or
so
did you just have to catch up when you went down there?
Spanish was my first language, and I didn't learn English fluently until I was in kindergarten. I learned English somewhat also through preschool, but it was really in kindergarten when I was immersed full-time in school that I learned English. And like a lot of, I think what's common, at least in where I grew up, there was a period of my life where I also did not want to speak Spanish because I wanted to distance myself from the things that I felt already made me different. So there was a period of my life where I wouldn't speak at all. My parents would speak to me in Spanish and I would reply in English. And then, of course, when I was in Mexico, I would pick it up and become even more fluent and get the accent right. even more than when I was home. But luckily also through my work in high school and actually after high school, so in high school I worked at one of my uncle's restaurants. So I spoke a lot of Spanish there with the staff. And then I was a customer service representative at one point for a travel company. And so anytime someone called in Spanish, they would send them over to me. So I got a lot of practice and have been able to keep it up just from combination of speaking with family. And even writing this, I would learn new words if I was trying to say something and I knew I wanted to say it in Spanish. So I've been lucky to be able to keep it up at this point.
You write very well. I appreciate the way you put your words together.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how you got started and if you've had studied or training in that area.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my start with writing was really journaling. When I was 13, my sister gave me a journal. I was actually a really angry kid and had a hard time expressing myself, but I found that writing was the one place where I could really make sense and kind of calm myself down and figure out the exact words that I wanted to say. I often felt growing up that if I tried to say things out loud, I couldn't, my throat would feel like it was all tied up and I would say the wrong thing. But writing and letter writing was the form that I would entrust to speak for me when I felt like I couldn't on my own. And even though I always kind of knew I wanted to write a book, I thought that everyone had that dream. I was like, oh, don't all kids see a book and want to write one? It's not the case. But I didn't know what being a writer would look like. And it didn't seem like it was practical. My mom was very supportive, actually. And she said when I was little that I should be a writer. She said, you're a great writer. You should be a writer when you grow up. And somehow I became the one who was like, that's not practical, Mom. Why would you, I need to start a career. And what career can I have if I study writing? So in a sort of role reversal, I think of what's common, I was the one that was saying it wasn't practical. And in school, I ended up going with a route that's a sort of a combination social work education degree. And I thought I would be a teacher for a long time and then sort of realized that just that full-time and on top of full-time work of, teachers are experiencing work 24 hours a day. I already knew that knowing myself and wanting to be involved in everything, I would sort of burn out. So then I was just on this path where I didn't know what I was going to do for a while. And I kept coming back to writing, but again, didn't think of it as a career path. I ended up doing an internship when I was 20 at a feminist media outlet, and that really helped with shifting from a more academic tone that I had learned in school and then to being able to write more conversationally. And really, the foundation of this book was in a community workshop. It was a year-long program that I did in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and it was focused on not only nonfiction, which is what I write, but also fiction, which I think is really helpful to study both because fiction, builds beautiful scenes and worlds and you see dialogue really well. And I think that as a nonfiction writer, I want to pull from those foundations in order to be immersive in the writing. But it really has been a few years, I guess like 10 years of taking community workshops in that program that gave me the courage to write in the way that I wanted to write and to write my own stories. Because for a long time, I also was doing journalism, which gave me a lot of skills with writing, but again, was writing for other people and writing their stories. And so it's been this sort of circular route up and down that has brought me back. And now I am in a master's program studying creative writing finally, which feels like a homecoming because I've always wanted to study writing, but I never had done it formally. And so I'm really grateful to the community workshops that I did. But a lot of it has sort of led up to this moment now where I am going to take that next step. And where I also understand that being a writer can look many different ways. It can be someone who does a lot of writing workshops and does speaking engagements, or it can be someone who writes full-time and they only write books and that's their work. Or it can be a professor who, writes on the side, or anyone who writes on the side. And so I think that just my understanding too of what being a writer has really expanded too since, immersing myself into the world of writers, because we are a very diverse range of folks with diverse career paths at the same time. Thank you. And then one other note too, on the writing style, what I came back to was thinking about when I was 13 years old and the books that I would have wanted to read. I came to reading actually later in life. I mean, I read in school, but I was not super interested in reading. And part of that, I think, is because I just didn't find books that I connected with. And so I thought about what kind of book would I have wanted to read when I was 13. And that's why I try to write it a really accessible way where it goes from a younger voice to an older voice and you can grow with the voice. But it isn't something that is so advanced to a level where you need a dictionary every other page, which is, you know, wonderful and valuable in its own, but wasn't the kind of book I wanted to write.
That's similar to the question that I was going to ask. They say to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. So right now, who are the writers that you listen to or enjoy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think reading is definitely really important to writing, and especially if you like want to write for publication. But at the same time, I just also want to emphasize that, you know, when I was 13 years old and journaling, writing was just, that was it. That was important, and I didn't need the reading yet, you know? So there's kind of two different goals there. But as far as writers that I'm currently reading that I really like, I love the writer Carmen Maria Machado. She's a contemporary writer who wrote a collection of short stories and then recently wrote an amazing memoir called In the Dream House. And the memoir is like her experience of emotional abuse in a relationship. But every single essay is short, and it's a study of form. So it'll be her memory through the lens of, you know, how do I write this in satirical form? How do I write this as if it were a synopsis for a film? And so it's a really interesting sort of meta form of storytelling. Other writers that I really enjoy, there's a poet whose name is Shayla Sabri, and she does hybrid poetry forms where it's poetry but also kind of prose. And I'm just interested right now, I think, in particular, in writers who are pushing the forms of genre, just because I love the idea that you can just do anything you want to do and that it doesn't have to be exactly what we've been taught is what a book looks like. Other writers, Callie Fajardo-Onstein, she is the author. She's a Colorado author, if you're not familiar with her. She wrote the short story collection Sabrina and Karina, and a lot of those are based in Denver. And actually her mom is who connected me with this library here. So there's a lot of amazing writers out there. And Fajardo-Onstein. Yeah, it's two last names, Fajardo and then dash Onstein.